اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه صلاة وسلام عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. Now we're going to continue the subject of Ahlul Bayt. And one of the reasons I want to kind of go in this chronological order, this is just to kind of give the background to Ahlul Bayt as far as the chronological order. So, we kind of see how their significance became more and more apparent over time, to the surroundings. I'm going to go over a little bit of that today, inshallah. And then we can kind of go over other aspects of them later on, after kind of a general overview. So we're still doing the general overview, historically, inshallah. Last week we got to the point we were talking about the hijrah. And we mentioned that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he appointed Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh to return all of the trust that had been given to him. As I said, these same people who wanted to kill him, these same people who, now were making all these false accusations against him, still knew that he's the only one that they could really trust with any of their stuff. So if they had something that needed safekeeping, he's the one they would come to. And so all of that had to be returned, and it couldn't be returned earlier because then it would be apparent as to when he's leaving. Even though, Quraysh already had that sense because of everyone else had already left. And so this is, so he appoints Ali because it was either because the trust was given to him. And so again, from an Islamic perspective, if someone gives me a trust and I accept that trust, then it's my responsibility to personally return that trust. And so it could either be him or someone from the family who could represent him directly. And so that was Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh. And so that night Ali slept in his bed, which, as we've talked about, was not the first time he had done this. His bed from the childhood was the chest of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for the whole 3 years of the boycott, he slept in the bed of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam because of the threat of a possible assassination attempt. So he did that for all those 3 years, and even later on. He would do that periodically whenever the threat level rose. And so again, this wasn't the first time. But this was the time when he was asked later on how he slept. He said, I never slept better in my life because he knew that he had to be up the next day to return all these trust. And if anything would happen to him, then he couldn't return the trust. And yet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam only assigned him to do this. It wasn't like, oh, you do this, but if something happens to you, somebody else do this. And we see this in the Battle of Mu'tah, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells, Zayd ibn Haritha, or he tells the army, as he's sending the army away, he says that, that Zayd is your leader, and if something happens to him, then Ja'far ibn Abi Talib will be your leader, and if something happens to him, then Abdullah ibn Rawaha will be your leader, and if something happens to him, then choose amongst yourselves. So even a Jewish man who had overheard this, he says to Quraysh, he says to the people of Medina Munawwara that these three will not be returning. Because this is how the prophets of old used to prophesize things. That if, and when they say if, it means, okay, yeah, this is what's happening. Yeah. And so he didn't say that either. So he said, I never slept better in my life because I knew nothing could happen to me. And this also shows us the iman of Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. And so, he had also told him, he didn't just tell him to return the trust. He also told him that you will come and meet me in Quba after 3 days. And of course, when we hear that, for us, most of us think, okay, after 3 days you set out. But the thing is, Rasulullah stayed in Thawr for 3 days before he secretly sets out from there. At the cave of Thawr, he stayed there for 3 days, and then secretly on the third night they set out finally. And Thawr is right there. I mean, it's very close to the Kaaba. It's not very far from the Kaaba at all. So literally, he was hiding out under the noses of Quraysh. But Ali set out in such a way, and it took Ali 3 days to arrive in Quba. And he arrives in Quba 3 days after Rasulullah has arrived in Quba. And Ali, when he makes this trip, he only travels by night. And one is hot during the day, but he also doesn't want to be seen, and so he's traveling at night. And he makes that journey from Mecca all the way to Medina Munawwara in 3 nights, which is not an easy task at all. And especially if you've been there and you see that terrain, it's rough. And he gets there. This is that love is just pulling him. So we see this. And so, and then eventually Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would send Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu anhu and some other companions, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu as well. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu didn't go, but Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu sent some servants to come and get the rest of the family and bring them to Medina Munawwara as well, because they knew that Quraysh wouldn't do anything against the women, and the women were still under the protection of Banu Hashim, and so they weren't. That was not a concern, or not an overwhelming concern at least. And so this is how they did things. This is the point when we will start seeing the distinction of Ahlul Bayt, and is after the Hijrah. And this is an important point to note and to understand as well. When we talk about Ahlul Bayt, these are the people in whose house the Quran is being revealed. These are the blood relatives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who himself not only is the one who brings the Quran, but is the manifestation of the Quran. And so we see this also in Karbala, when Imam Hussein Islam, when he goes in front of the people, and he says, we are the ones in whose house the Quran was revealed. That's not an insignificant thing. That's a very significant thing. That they are the ones in whose house the Quran is revealed, so they are the ones who have this character of the Quran. So when we look at the life of Ahlul Bayt, basically during the time of Makkah. So during the time of Makkah, as we've talked about, for the first 3 years, secret propagation. I mean, it wasn't open propagation, and not very many people even knew anything was going on, except for those who had become Muslim, and some others who, just thought, oh, it's a dying fad. It's going to come and go just like every other fad does. And then for the next 10 years, again, there weren't very many ahkam. There weren't a lot, do's and don'ts, other than just being decent, being a good, upright person, which was a reflection of Iman. So we see for these years, for these 13 years in Mecca, this focus just on Iman, right? And Iman is what? Iman is something that's in the heart. The reality of Iman is in the heart. That's why you have the category of hypocrites. Because hypocrites, their heart is devoid of Iman, but their actions tell you that, oh yeah, they're very upright and pious people. So Islam is something of the heart. The Iman is in the heart. And so we see this reflection within Ahlul Bayt, that for these first 13 years, we'll see glimpses of them, of their significance, but it's mostly kind of behind the scenes. We talked about Bibi Fatima Salamullah alayha when she was 5, and she was removing the guts of the camel that Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayth had placed on the shoulders of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was in sajda. And a few other things. And we talked about, these things that Ali radhiyallahu anhu did, but even those are kind of behind the scene. Sleeping in the bed of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, becoming that target for the assassins. It's not something that the common person saw. So we see this reflection within them of the Quran as the Quran is being revealed. Now, after the Hijrah, now we're going to start seeing other aspects, because now we start seeing all of these, where the Quran now is become, the revelation has become, or rather the distinctions have become more open, rather. And I hope I can kind of get this point across adequately, and as far as what I mean by this. And inshallah it's kind of clear, or should be clear to most people. If it's not, let me know. So, of course, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in Quba, again, 3 days later, Ali radhiyallahu anhu joins him there. One of the first things that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam does in Quba, of course, is to lay the foundations for Masjid al-Quba. And Ali radhiyallahu, along with Abu Bakr radhiyallahu, and the other companions, they took part in the laying of this foundation. He arrived in Quba on Monday. He leaves on Friday, headed toward the city, to enter the city of Medina Munawwara. And according to the hadith in Sahih Bukhari, this was Friday, the 12th of Rabiul Awwal. And this is, of course, as we've talked about before so many times, when the whole city of Medina Munawwara is decorated, lit up, everyone's out on the streets, the women are on the rooftops looking down, looking at this whole procession of the Muslims coming in, and basically you have this massive parade that is occurring. The children are singing, and this is when we get the famous song of طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داعي. So that famous song that was being sung by the daughters or the children of Banu Najjar, which is the clan of Khazraj, the tribe of Khazraj, which is related to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the mother of the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, his mother Salma radiyallahu anha, the great grandmother of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is from that clan of Banu Najjar. Interesting, we talked about Amara, Nusayba bint Ka'b or Nasiba bint Ka'b, both pronunciations are correct, this past Friday. She's also from Banu Najjar. So she is also related to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that manner. Okay. So, we get this procession. The point I want to make here, which separate from Ahlul Bayt, is the first Jummah that was made along this path. It wasn't made in a masjid. And the reason I have to say this is that, and there was a person who argued, of course we're here in the Islamic Community Center of Griffin, and this is not a masjid, nor do we call it a masjid. This is the Islamic Center. And so there's this person who argued with my father and actually literally cursed him, and told him that he wasn't going to come and pray Jummah Salat here unless he called this a masjid. And he doesn't make Jummah here, which is fine, which is good, alhamdulillah. If you can have that mindset, then that's good. The first Jummah that was made was not made in any masjid. It was made along the way between Quba and Medina Munawwara. Later on, the Turks, they built a masjid there to mark the spot. So that's just as kind of a side note. But of course, when he arrives in the city, we know that one of the first things that he does is he lays the foundation for the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Masjid of Medina Munawwara, Masjid al-Nabi, and of course the companions are also take part in the laying of this foundation, including Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu anhum, and various others. But another thing that he does is that he creates this brotherhood. Because what you have is you have these people who have just immigrated. You know, they from Mecca to Medina Munawwara. These are people who literally left everything behind. They came there, many of them with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. And that was it. So, you know, they're in the foreign land, foreign place. You have this tribal system everywhere. These are people who have no relatives. They have no tribe or clan that they can connect to and have support from. So how are these people going to get established in this community? And so he creates this brotherhood. And he separates, you know, so he takes like one person from the immigrants, from the Muhajir, and he pairs them off with another person from the Ansar. And he says, you are brothers. One interesting, or several interesting points when he did this was that he would pick people that had similar social status within their own communities and similar personalities that are going to get along. Here it's not like you can't pick, you know, like if you have two people that talk a lot, yeah, they're not going to get along. Okay? Because when you have two people that talk a lot, they're not going to get along because both are going to try to talk and one's not going to listen. No one's going to listen. You're going to have issues. You know, same thing with husband and wife. You know, if one talks a lot and the other stays quiet, things work out. You know, if neither one of them talks a lot, you can still get things to work out. Okay? So he paired them off in such a way that you have a lot of similarities and you have this cohesiveness. So you're not going to have problems later on. And you see this. And you see the attitudes of the Ansar, you know, and the attitudes of those immigrants. The immigrants who, when they became brothers, would say, oh, I'm taking everything you got. You know, and then, but the Ansar, on the other hand, were like, oh, take whatever you need, whatever you want. Not just what you need, what you want. Okay? So you have these you know, offsetting attitudes that balanced each other out. Okay? So the Muhajir, they said, we're only going to take the minimum. And these guys were saying, oh, no, you need to take more. Okay? So he paired everybody off. You know, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, you know, Abdul Rahman bin Auf, all of these companions who had immigrated, Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, you know, Zubair bin Awam, everybody got paired off. Okay? With the exception of Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. And he's, you know, when all of this is done, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has wrapped this up, okay, it's over with, you know, Ali is sitting, you know, on the side there, and tears are flowing, and he's crying. And, you know, so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Ya Ali, you know, what's wrong with you? He says, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you gave everyone a brother. And these brothers at this time, later on the rule would change, but at this time, they could inherit from each other. I mean, this is how strong the bondship that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made at that moment. So he says, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you gave everyone a brother, but not me. You left me out. And this is, you know, that famous saying of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he says to Ali, he says, oh Ali, is it not enough for you that anta akhi fi dunya wal akhirah, that you are my brother in this life and in the next? You know, so this isn't a small distinction. I mean, think of the honor, you know, and the position of Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh. You know, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has kept him for himself. And he gave everyone else, someone else, but for himself he kept Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh. And which is sad, because there are people today, when you bring this up, if you simply say, and like there'll be, this hadith is also mentioned in various poems. These narrators who write manqabat or poetry in honor of Sayyidina Ali, they'll mention this without mentioning that it's a hadith. They'll just say, oh, he's the brother of Rasulullah in this world and the hereafter. And there are other people who get upset, oh, didn't he why are you insulting the other people? It wasn't Ja'far his brother and so-and-so his brother. Again, those are different categories. Here, this is a separate distinction for Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh. So this is now, like, as I said, after the hijrah is now when we start seeing these things come out even more openly. So he's given this status and this honor. Again, just think about this. Rasulullah ﷺ kept him for himself. And again, when he's paired them off, he paired them off with personalities and statuses that were very, very similar. So the one that he paired for himself is Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. So, at this point, eventually the rest of the family arrives. Fatima salamullah alayha. And at this point also is when Rasulullah he starts sending out groups to go and raid or irritate caravans that Quraysh were sending. Because if you remember, Quraysh, once Rasulullah left, it was not the end for them. They are now planning on, how do we get him? How do we get rid of this threat as they perceived it? Or as the propaganda made it seem. So it wasn't like, okay, yeah, he's gone, we don't need to worry about him anymore. No, now comes the planning of, okay, what do we do to go get these people and kill them off, finish this off, get rid of all this, this thorn in our side, as they saw it. And so they were sending these caravans. The caravans were the normal caravans, but the purpose behind the caravans now had changed. Because the purpose behind the caravans before was always to make money. It's still to make money, but on the side they're also getting ready, getting weapons, getting things ready to come and attack the Muslims. And so, before the Battle of Badr, which would take place the following year. See, Rasulullah he arrives in Medina Munawwara, 12th of Rabiul Awwal, so basically the beginning of Hijrah. So they have a whole year, and then the following Ramadan. So basically, from the time that Rasulullah started sending the immigrants from Mecca to Medina, which was Muharram of the year of immigration, to the Battle of Badr is basically a year and 9 months. Okay. But for this year and 9 months, basically Quraysh had been planning on how to kill Rasulullah the whole time. And for the year and 7 months, because Rasulullah arrived 2 months after everybody else was there, because Rabiul Awwal, which is the third Islamic month, so a year, 6 months, a year and a half, basically. They are now, the whole goal is, how do we get them? How do we destroy Medina? So the first thing they did was that they did an economic boycott of Medina Munawwara. So basically, Quraysh themselves, but because Quraysh are the central tribe, the ruling, or considered the most honored tribe amongst the Arabs, even before Islam, because they are the custodians of the Kaaba. So, and they are the direct descendants of Ismail alayhi salam. So they use this, to their advantage, and they control. So all of the Arabs honor them and respect them. So when the Quraysh says, "Oh, don't do business with these people," well, these other tribes are going to honor and respect that command or request. And this is, and the Ansar, the people of Medina, they knew what was going to happen. Again, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had told them, because if you remember, when they came and they gave that pledge at Aqaba, where you had the 70 men and the 2 women, and then you had about 2 or 3 children as well. That's why you see a discrepancy as to how many people. Some say 72, some say 74, 5, depends on if they're adding the children in there or not. But at that pledge, when they had agreed to take Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Medina Munawwara, the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he comes to them, to the Ansar, and he says, "Look, take my nephew, that's fine. But if you're going to take him, just be aware that when you take him, you will take on the whole fight of all of the Arabs. All of the Arabs are going to be against you. And your crops are going to fail because they were farmers, date farmers. Your crops are going to fail. Your women are going to become widowed. Your children will be orphans, and your heads will be separated from your bodies. So if you're ready to do this, fine, take them. If not, then leave them here, and we'll do the best we can." And at this point, Abbas, radiallahu anhu, the uncle of Rasulullah, has not become Muslim. And he's the only non-Muslim who knew about this secret meeting, because he's the head of Banu Hashim at that point. So they came running to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, "Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is what your uncle says." And he says, "Well, he tells you the truth. This is what's going to happen." And so they asked, they said, "Well, then what will we get? If we accept this, then what do we get for that?" And he said, "Jannah. You'll get paradise." But that's not what they wanted. That wasn't good enough for them. They wanted something better than that. They didn't want a physical Jannah. They wanted a true Jannah. And they understood what true Jannah was. So this is when the eldest amongst them, Bara bin Ma'rur, he stands up and he says, "Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Jannah," he says, "that's fine." He says, "But when all of this becomes yours, when all of Arabia comes to your feet," because they knew this was going to happen, "when all of this comes to your feet, then you will leave us and come back to your people. And then what do we do?" And he says, "No." Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "No." He said that, I will immigrate to you, and I will be buried amongst you. So he already knows where he's going to be buried. He said, "I'll be buried amongst you, and your blood is my blood, and your flesh and your life is my life." And then they said, "Okay, now we're good." They had no problem accepting all of this, worldly destruction, and seeing their children starve and starving themselves and dying and all of these things. They had no problem accepting that, so long as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't going to leave them. So this is what's happening in Medina Munawwara. So all of this boycott is going on. No one is buying their crops. They are basically being isolated and limited. A few of them are able to come to Mecca, but most of them can't even do that anymore, under threat of death. Which is also interesting because, even under pre-Islamic law, the Quraysh, anyone who came to Mecca for Umrah or for Hajj, hands off. Didn't matter if they were at war with them. But when Islam came, the rules changed, as they always do. We see that today as well. And so So, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is sending these groups out, but he only at this time, because the agreement that he had made with the Ansar was that they would protect him when he is in the city. According to the agreement, they had no obligation outside of the city. They didn't see it that way, but that's what was written on the paper. And we'll see their true attitude when the time for Badr comes. And we've already seen their true attitude already, but we'll see a different aspect of that real attitude and their love for Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when the time for Badr comes. But he doesn't send any of the Ansar on any of these other excursions. And that was also another part of why he was, so the attacking the caravans had several purposes. One was, basically these caravans are the ones that are going to be used to attain the wealth to come and kill the Muslims. So you need to stop that. Also, these are the same people that are now economically boycotting you and basically making it hard for even the children to eat to their full. And like Abdullah ibn Masud radiallahu anhu said, he said that we never ate to our bellies for full until after Khaybar. So Khaybar is another 7 years away. Okay. So that was, so now you can actually, if you can get something from the caravan, well, now you can come and feed the people. Because these are the same people that are, basically doing this economic warfare against you. But it also forced, because it forced Quraysh now to find different routes to go towards Sham, which cost them extra money. So even if the caravans weren't raided, just the threat of the raid there, made them go further outside. So now it was costing them extra money. So again, they can't use that money against them. And this is part of what I was talking about after Jummah this past Friday, was all these so-called Muslim countries that are using their wealth not to enhance the status or the situation of the Muslims, but to kill the Muslims. And you can look that up. The top 3 countries that are buyers of arms are, from the West, are Muslim countries, and all of that is being used against the Muslims themselves. So Ali is gone, a lot. He goes. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sends him on this, excursion, sends him for this purpose. So he's in and out a lot. As I said before, these are the people in whose house the Quran was revealed. And so Ali, amongst the companions, even at the end, is the only companion of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam who could say, without any hesitation, that he knew exactly when each verse of the Quran was revealed, where it was revealed, why it was revealed, and for whom it was revealed. And this is also why we'll see later on that the other companions, they would say that if we heard from an authentic source that Ali said such and such, and we didn't need to ask any further. His opinion, which really wasn't an opinion, his statement of fact was absolute. Because we have opinions, because we have no basis for what we're saying. He had basis for everything he said and did, which went back directly to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So as I said, for the next year and a half, this is going on. Until finally news arrives that there's this huge caravan that Quraysh have sent to Sham, which is led by Abu Sufyan. And this was really that caravan that was going to finalize the preparation of Quraysh to be able to come and attack Medina Munawwara. Okay. So that's why this caravan was such a big prize. Not only the size of the caravan, but because of what it contained and what it would allow Quraysh to be able to do. So, so this is when Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he gathers the people, and they set out to. The purpose of them setting out was to stop this caravan. And this was the first time that he allowed the Ansar to join the expedition. And so of the 313 men that left Medina Munawwara, only 82 of them were the Muhajir, were the immigrants. The remaining, 200 and, what is that, 82 minus 313 is, these days,
31.
Yeah, 231. 231 were the Ansar. And so, and as we know, and we've gone over this story recently during Ramadan, this event, rather, not story, but event. This story has so many other connotations to it, but this event. Of course, the caravan, Abu Sufyan is able to divert the caravan, and even before he diverts the caravan, he sends word to Quraysh that the caravan's been attacked. So the Quraysh, when they left Mecca, were under the impression that the caravan had been attacked and all of their stuff had been looted and taken, and all the people had been killed. This is the propaganda that arrived in Mecca. Basically, this is what Abu Sufyan wanted them to believe, because that would mobilize them. Because just like you get like modern day politics, you get manufactured consent. So the government, they do something or they say something to get everybody riled up, get everybody's emotions flared up, get everybody angry and afraid, and get them to go a certain way. And this is exactly what Abu Sufyan does. So no different than now, just the way they do it's a little different. So Abu Sufyan, so Quraysh are leaving, most of them are leaving Mecca, and pretty much all of them, thinking that, the caravan's been looted, all of their stuff is gone, and all of their people are killed. And this is also why, when they left Mecca, they left with 1,200 men. 200 of them, when they found out that, the caravan's safe, went back and said, no, we're not part of this. Okay. We just came out because we thought of what we thought had happened to the caravan, but now that we know the caravan's fine, we're going back. So they arrive in Badr with 1,000 men. And of course, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he sets out, all of his people are thinking that they were going to go and attack this caravan. And on the way, now the news comes that this army from Quraysh has come. I'm not going to go into the details of Badr, but there's certain significant points that I'm going to reiterate and everybody needs to remember. Is, again, Quraysh came out well prepared. They came out for war, with the intention of war, with the intention of putting an end to the Muslims, putting an end to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This was their intention. Okay. So they came out, with horses, very well-equipped cavalry, very well-equipped soldiers. Pretty much everyone had their armor. They had their swords. They had their shields. They had everything they needed for war. To the extent that one of them was so well armored that only his eyes could be seen. He had a sword in one hand, a spear in another hand, and another dagger that he kind of opened the visor and put it between his teeth. So literally, he was armed to the teeth. And so, you know, and the Muslims, they didn't come out with this intention of fighting a war. You had basically 3 men to a camel. You had 2 horses. You had, you know, and horses, I mean, or rather camels were not used at that point in the actual fighting. They were used to carry the stuff, you know, that was needed, and some other things. But you used horses because horses were, you know, much more maneuverable. You could get in and out quicker, and you know, so you had that cavalry. Quraysh came with a cavalry. The Muslims had 2 horses. The Muslims had 7.5 swords. They had 8 swords. One of them was broken in half. You know, of course, they had Zulfiqar, and we're going to go into that, you know, if I have time today. If not, we'll go into that next week. But they had Zulfiqar, and that's really all they needed. All right. But, you know, and you have amongst them, you know, young, you know, teenagers, middle-aged men, and older men as well. You know, when the armies finally meet in Badr, and that morning of the battle, so a lot's happened since then. And again, you know, if you look at, you know, like the attitude, when the Muslims found out that, oh, we're going to war, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked them, what do you say? You know, this is before, you know, the armies are basically standing face to face. That the night before that, he asked them, he said, what do you say? We know that, you know, the Quraysh army. Of course, Abu Bakr, he stands up and he says, oh, you know, we'll do whatever you want, no problems, we're ready to fight, we have no issues. He asked again, what do you say? And again, you know, Umar stands up, so he's another muhajir. He says the same thing, you know. Then again, and this time another muhajir stands up. He says the same thing. He says, Ya Rasulullah, we're not like the Jews who said, Samina wa asayna. You and your Lord go and fight, or we hear and we disobey, and or you know, or that you and your Lord, like the people said to, or we're not like those who said to Musa alayhi salam, you and your Lord go fight. And if you fight, we will fight alongside with you. And even if you you know, lead us to, there's a place in Yemen. He said, even if you lead us there, you know, we'll fight alongside with you, anyone that comes in your path. And Rasulullah thanked him and said, you know, thank you for your statement. And he sat down, and again he asked, what do you say? And this is when the Ansar, they understood. He's talking about them because of the pact. The pact didn't make, you know, it wasn't any, according to the pact, they were not obliged to fight for him outside of the city. And they're outside of the city, well outside of the city. Badr is not, you know, we think of Badr as right next to Medina Munawwara. It's not. You know, it's like 60, 80 miles away. Okay. So this is one of them, Sa'ad stands up and he says, Ya Rasulullah, you know, you do what you wish, and we are with you. Whatever you desire, we are with you. And you know, and then he goes on. He says, look, even if you lead us into the ocean, you know, and for a desert-dwelling Arab, you know, the ocean was certain death. You know, we will go into the waves of the ocean with you. Even if you lead us there, we are with you. And then in the end he says, look, you know, we know how to fight. We are a people who know how to fight, and we fight hard when the time comes. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to show you something that will please you tomorrow. So again, their attitude. You know, you look at this attitude, and you look at our attitudes. And that should tell us why we're in the situation that we're in. So the next day, when the armies are lined up, and again, skipping over a lot of details because I want to focus on Ahlul Bayt. From the side of the Quraysh, 3 men come out. And these 3 men, if you looked at their history, would be considered, and especially one of them, Utbah bin Rabi, who's the leader of these 3 men, they would be considered the most moderate of Quraysh as far as Islam was concerned. You have Utbah, his brother Shayba, and Utbah's son Walid. One of Utbah's other sons, Hudhayfa, is over in the Muslim camp on the other side. But these are the first 3 to come out after their ego was stroked. After Utbah's ego was stroked, that, oh, you don't want to fight because your son's over there. I'll show you. So he's the first one to run out, and he calls his brother and his son Walid. Walid is a massive man who's experienced and been in 23 battles before this. Never been defeated. Utbah's head is so big that he couldn't find a helmet that would fit. So, as I've said before, his head was literally big and figuratively big. And they challenged. They said, they challenged the Muslims. Who's ready to fight us? We're going to take care of you. Come on. So the first 3 people that ran out were the Ansar. Were 3 Ansar that come running out because they want to show Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we're not standing back. We're ready to defend you, and your honor with our lives and our children and everything that we have. And when Utbah asked them, who are you? Because they're also wearing some armor. So they say their names, and he says, then Utbah addresses Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, Ya Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, send us our equals. We don't want to fight them. We are Quraysh. That's basically what he's saying. He says, send us our equals, meaning we are Quraysh. We are, in his mind, we are the top dogs. We want somebody equal to us, somebody that can match our status. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he calls them back. He says, come back. And then he calls out. He says, Ya Ali, Ya Hamza, Ya Ubaydullah. Ubaydullah is not well known. Ubaydullah ibn Harith, who's also a cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the son of the oldest son of Hazrat Abdul Muttalib radiallahu anhu. So he's also one of the very early Muslims. And so these 3 go out. Ali comes out with Zulfiqar in hand. The history of Zulfiqar is that this originally was a gift from Bilqis, the queen of Sheba, to Sulaiman alayhi salam. And then when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam immigrates to Medina Munawwara, there are 2 narrations. One says that it was collected in spoils of war, but that doesn't make sense because there weren't any, at that time, there weren't any wars against the Jews or Bani Israel. So, but the other narration talks about a clan that were the descendants of Sulaiman alayhi salam, who they came and they met Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, accepted Islam, and they presented this as a gift to him. Because it had been passed down through their generations. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, is rahmatul lil alameen. So who's going to alleviate the difficulty for him when the time of war comes? When it comes time to pick up the sword? Other than the one who alleviates difficulties, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has appointed to alleviate difficulties, who is Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam hands him Zulfiqar. And so when these three go out, Utbah, or rather Hamza radiallahu anhu, the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who's 3 years older than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stands in front of Utbah. Ubaidullah, the other cousin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stands in front of Shayba, the brother of Utbah. And Ali radiallahu anhu comes and faces off with Walid, the son of Utbah. And again, Walid is a massive man. If you read the descriptions of Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh, you know, his height was a little less than average, you know, for the time. Whereas, you know, of course, when we talk about Umar, his height was much larger than average. But Ali was on the shorter side. Walid is another massive man. And so Walid asked Ali, who are you? He says, Ali, he said, I don't want to fight children. Ali at this time is, what, 24 or so years old? And Ali said, well, you have to fight me. And so in their discussion, or in their conversation rather, you know, Walid gets upset and he attacks Ali. On the other side, you know, Utbah and Hamza they clash, and over there then Shayba and Ubaidullah they clash. Walid strikes, Ali deflects the strike, and then he comes down with Zulfiqar, and he basically cuts him from one shoulder down the other side, and you got this massive man that's basically falling in two parts. And then he goes and he finishes off Shayba, because Hamza finished Utbah. Ubaidullah and Shayba, so Ubaidullah and Shayba, they struck each other simultaneously. They were both, you know, would have been eventually fatal wounds, but Ali comes and finishes off Shayba, and then picks up Ubaidullah and brings him to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he lays the head of Ubaidullah on the blessed thigh of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Ubaidullah, he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that, will I be a martyr? You know, will this give me the status of being a martyr? And he said, yes. He said, then it's perhaps that I am the one for whom Hazrat Abu Talib, who's also Ubaidullah's uncle, Hazrat Abu Talib, he made the statement or the poem that we will sacrifice, you know, our children and our lives, you know, for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it was in this position that Ubaidullah finally he passes and attains true life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised the Muslims that he would send down 1,000 angels. And he says in the Quran that this is only to strengthen your hearts. You know, Jibreel alayhi salam, you know, he finished off the people of Lut, you know, with part of his wing. So why do you need 1,000 angels? One's more than enough. But again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says this is to strengthen your heart. But then he says, I'll send 3,000 to even make it seem better. But eventually he sends 5,000, because these will be just like the companions of Badr are considered the best of companions. The angels that were granted permission to come and fight in Badr are considered the best of angels. And this is the only battle in which the angels actually fought. We'll see Khandaq, where they, you know, manipulate the weather, you know, at the command of Allah, but they didn't actually take part in the fighting. So eventually, you know, and the people said, the Muslims said later, they could tell which people were killed by the angels because their wounds were cauterized. You know, as the blades of the angels came through them, it just cauterized everything. So there wasn't, you know, you had someone dead, but they didn't bleed out. So that's how they knew which ones were killed by the angels. And there are many other things to talk about, but again, I'm just focusing on Ahlul Bayt right now. So just basically at this point, just focusing on Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu wajh. So by the end of the battle, as we all know, 70 of the Quraysh were killed. But of those 70, 36 of them were killed by Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu wajh alone. And he helped in another 13, which leaves 21 for the remaining 312 soldiers and 5,000 angels. And this, after this battle, is when Ridwan, who is the gatekeeper of Jannah, you know, and why he comes down, we're going to talk about much later on. But just remember this point: he comes down, and you know, he's amongst those angels, and he makes this couplet. And before I go into the couplet, the other interesting thing about the angels is they didn't come down in Badr. They came down roughly a mile away and walked to Badr. And the reason that the scholars say is that so that there wouldn't be any disrespect to the people of Badr, that their feet, and to Rasulullah that their feet are coming down on top of them. So they came down at a distance and then came to Badr. And that distance is also, that place is marked where they descended. And then they came into Badr to support the Muslims. Of course, you know, a lot of these, you know, there were those who saw this. Most people did not see their presence, but they felt their presence. But Ridwan, the gatekeeper of Jannah, he says a couplet after this, which is very famous, because it will be used again and again later on. La fata illa Ali, la sayfa illa dhul fiqar. That there is no youth except Ali, and there is no sword except dhul fiqar. You know, to show their significance. Yeah, I guess I'm going to stop here because I'm going to reiterate these points next week, or some of these points next week as we move forward, and kind of open it up for some questions you know, related to this, or you know, we'll try to cover the ones related to this first, and if not, then you know, something else if someone has something, inshallah. So, any questions? Today was pretty simple. And I think as we go forward, once you start understanding the background, because as I said early on, you know, that statement where Rasulullah he says that, you know, you are my brother in this life and in the next, you know, just that distinction, you know, because it's used a lot in certain poetry, and because people don't know the background to it, they, you know, they come out with all these objections and stuff. There are people who even know the background to it, and they still object to it because they have their issue with Ali. And you can't help those people. But, you know, for those who don't know, you know, once you know, then it changes your perspective on things. Or at least it should change your perspective on things. You know, because when we're talking about the household, you know, the household is literally a part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we need to keep that in mind and be very clear about that, inshallah. anything? If not, then we can wrap it up today early. Is everybody there?
I'm here.
Okay, so you can still hear me. Yeah, somebody was calling me in between. Sometimes that throws things off, so I wasn't sure. But yeah, so that's good, alhamdulillah. So
Yeah, I'm here. It's fine.
wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Yeah, so like I said, I think it's going to start becoming easier to understand certain points, because we'll start seeing things more openly, and getting the background to stuff. So next week what we'll do is we'll talk about, like I said, I'll reiterate certain points from here, and then we'll move forward to Uhud. And actually next week we'll get into the marriage between Sayyidina Ali Karamallah and Bibi Fatima Salamullah alayha. So we'll get to that, and then perhaps if we have time, get into Uhud, and we'll see a repeat of La Fata illa Ali La Sayfa illa Dhul Fiqar, which will come up repeatedly now, pretty much after most of the battles. Somebody's going to be saying it, one form or the other. Okay. And this is all of this will be said in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and some of it will even be said, at the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So inshallah, I'll wrap things up. We'll make salat here. I guess y'all will make salat wherever, inshallah. And again, these, as I said before, and I'm going to keep saying this, these are the people in whose house the Quran is revealed. So these are the people who have this, literally this intimate contact with the Quran, and this deep understanding of it, because of that contact with the Quran. And so, we'll see this later on, even when we talk about the Ahlul Bayt, the scholars among Ahlul Bayt, such as Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam and various others, Imam Muhammad Baqir, who's, when they said things, it opened so many doors for people that we consider great scholars, who, if they had not had that contact with these great scholars of Ahlul Bayt, their understanding would have not been the same. Inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with His true love and the true love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions, and all of those whom they love, and may He give us the attitudes of the ones that He loves, the attitudes of the Ansar, the attitudes of the Muhajir, the attitudes of those who gave their lives defending the honor and the status of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and may He make us amongst those. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.